The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 501 Better Question. Lex could not tell what the figure was thinking, or what it felt about his question. The only thing he had to go determine anything about the figure was its voice. Compared to everything else about the figure, which was quite enigmatic, the figure's voice itself was a very standard masculine voice. The fact that the figure didn't immediately answer, however, was unusual and created the first real pause in the conversation. Lex didn't think the answer was beyond the figure, since he did not hesitate to talk about systems with Lex. Moreover, he did not really seem all that impressed by the systems either. He so easily talked about the midnight and not being the strongest system, as if even the strongest system was beneath him. Or, maybe, he himself had the strongest system. Eventually, the silence ended, but instead of providing an answer, the figure sighed. Wrong question, boy. But, considering how abruptly all this is happening, I'll do you one more favor and answer a better question. I think the more pertinent question would have been, what kind of questions should I ask you? While I can answer whatever questions you have, such as the purpose of the systems, knowing the answer will not in any way improve your situation whatsoever. Instead, you should focus on questions the answer to which will immediately benefit you, either by guiding your actions or saving you from some hazard. Of course, if you still wish to know about the system, ask again. I'll answer this time. Lex paused for a moment, and thought of all the problems currently plaguing him. There was the quest of discovering the issue with the crystal realm, the Henali asking for toll payment, his family, information about improving his own system, the regal embrace, Lex's eyes widened as he rearranged his priorities very quickly. He could use the figure to help him resolve a lot of problems, sure, but there were many problems he could resolve himself if he were stronger. So, he would receive a greater benefit from increasing his strength. How can I overcome the issue with the regal embrace? Lex asked, this time more confident about his question. This was probably the most important issue plaguing him. He could try to resolve it on his own, but his lack of knowledge would be a huge issue. Good question. The answer is twofold. The simple answer is, you can resolve the issue using your system. More specifically, the system can give you a reward that will resolve your problem. But just knowing that will not resolve your problem, so let me elaborate. I believe currently, the prompt you have been given is that the regal embrace has no way of progressing forward, as you have deviated from the path it had developed. That is actually incorrect. A more specific prompt would be that there is a path forward, but based on your current cultivation, you likely have no way of accessing the resources that will be required to pave the way forward. But the regal embrace is a self-contained entity, and it has no way of knowing that you can use the system to get resources. So now that you know that there indeed is a path forward, the question is, what are the resources you need and how can you get the system to give them to you? It's very simple really, you need to get a minimum of a SSS rank reward for a quest. Trust me, any reward you get from the system of that rank and higher will be exactly what you need to fix the regal embrace. But, and now this is important, whatever reward you get will evolve the regal embrace based on the reward as well as your new current affinity. So, the higher your reward, the better the result will be, so I suggest you put your full effort into this matter. Lex immediately had a few other questions to follow up, such as what did he mean by the regal embrace was a self-contained entity? But he did not ask them. Since his questions were limited, he would not make such an obvious mistake. He had another question, but he wasn't sure if asking that question would be a waste. He hesitated for a few moments while he debated with himself, but decided to ask anyway. What can my soul sense do? I don't understand it completely. Although he still could not see the figure's true appearance, Lex got the feeling that he smiled. Not a bad question. The gist of it is that it can allow you to detect, interact with, and influence any soul or soul-related item. Once you become adept at it, it won't be an exaggeration to say you can literally rip the soul out of someone's body. You can also change the nature of a soul. Sometimes, souls have inherent natures, and sometimes they are developed, but whatever the case, you can interact with them. If you had a more evil inclination, it would be within your capacity to manipulate someone's soul, to turn them into your slave forever. Of course, there are other minor things such as detecting the presence of life, being able to detect lies through fluctuations in souls, and communicating directly through souls similar to how spirit sense is used. The difference is, soul sense is a lot harder to detect as very few races inherently develop it. The most relevant thing to you, however, is that if you meet someone with a system, you can remove the system from their souls without harming them. Even if the system merged with their souls, all it would take is a little bit of skill and practice, and you can pull that bad boy right out. At this point, the figure started to chuckle. Not right now, but once you grow a bit, you can even become a phenomenal doctor, able to dismiss even death. All you'd have to do is move a soul from a dying body to an empty one capable of supporting life. Of course, that's only if the cause of death is physical, and not directly related to the soul. Oh, did I mention you can directly assault souls? Yes, there's that too. Occasionally missing content, please report errors in time. Chapter 502, Some Answers. The figure spent quite a long while detailing exactly how Lex could use the soul sense, and the list was honestly longer than Lex expected. He never really thought about it, but suddenly it made sense that cultivators had such long lifespans, because he could not even estimate the number of years it would take him to learn how to fully utilize his soul sense. In fact, a part of him was fairly certain that even the spirit sense was severely underutilized, but at least with that, information was common enough where Lex could investigate on his own. But based on the fact that the figure had not vanished after answering the question meant that he could still ask more questions. A part of him was really tempted to just ask him the cause of the anomaly in the crystal realm. Since he was supposed to ask questions that would give him immediate benefits, that was one of the big ones. That was what the logical part of his brain told him. But whether it was unfortunate or not, there was another voice in his head that stopped him from asking such a question. It was the voice of Lex's pride that he had accumulated so far. It was the voice that said he did not need handouts and easy solutions. Instead, he should look for the tools he needed to improve himself even further. But he had already asked 2 questions related to his cultivation. What else could he ask? Should he ask what his affinity did? Or maybe a way to improve on arrays? Should he ask about his left eye? Should he? This was not a time-sensitive issue, since the figure did not tell Lex he had to hurry, but he did not think it was wise to waste too much time, nonetheless. Unable to decide what exactly to prioritize, Lex decided to change his approach. What are some things you think I need to know? He asked, hoping this question wouldn't be a waste. See, you're getting better already. That's why I like you. You started off not so bright, let me tell you, but you've been improving non-stop. Now let's see. What are things you need to know? Let's start with the fact that time travel is completely possible. You can travel from the present to the future. But travel in any other direction is impossible. Don't even think about it. There is no level of power you can reach where such a thing is possible. You don't even want to know the kind of punishment those who try end up suffering. I'm telling you this not because I think you'll want to time travel. I'm telling you this because, statistically speaking, you'll come across a situation where you'll need to make a decision. One will be a smart decision, and the other will be a decision you will regret not making forever. When that time comes, child, just keep this in mind. There is no remedy for regret. Next, there's a chat room for system users, created by someone who has a system for chat rooms. Sooner or later you'll receive an invite. You'll be tempted to join it. It's completely safe, and no one can track you just because you use it, not even the original system wielder. Don't join it. Since we're on the topic of systems, all systems operate under a certain number of rules. Some of them are common, some of them are different, but regardless, try to understand the rules of your own system. Nothing is as random or meaningless as it may seem. Another thing, once you're confident enough, travel to as many realms as possible, trust me. The younger the realm, the better. You'll find unexpected surprises waiting for you. But all of these things are very generic and boring pieces of advice. What's something interesting? The figure moved about, as if it was looking left and right, searching for something. Ah yes, here we go. Alright, remember this. In the origin realm, there is a galaxy called Swera. In that galaxy, there is a belt of rogue planets just traveling through space, no star to center them or guide their motion. Within that belt lies an extremely valuable item that will be greatly beneficial to you. But you have approximately 6 months before someone else finds it. It could be sooner or later, but not by much. The figure paused, as if to think for a moment, and then said, yeah, that should about cover it. Think of this as a bonus reward for entertaining me a bit. If you're ever able to do something on the same level as surpass the regal embrace and attract my attention again, I might visit you another time. But, frankly speaking, it's unlikely, so there's a good chance this is the last time we meet. Also, don't suddenly be scared that anyone can intrude in the way I did. There's not a lot of beings in the universe at my level, if any. Before the figure's voice disappeared, Lex jerked awake, and found himself lying in his bed shirtless. He looked around left and right, but found everything was perfectly normal in his apartment. Was it just a dream? Lex snorted at the idea and jumped out of bed. He was perfectly capable of differentiating reality from a dream, so he knew full well that everything he had experienced was not a creation of his subconscious brain. He entered the meditation room and sat down in a meditation pose, calming his mind. When he was ready, he manipulated his soul sense, something that had become much easier since he learned to control his spirit sense since the premise was the same. He wrapped his body in his soul sense, and delved within till he saw the familiar golden shine of the system hidden within himself. Then, using his soul sense, he touched it, and pulled it out of his body and into his hand. For the first time, Lex laid eyes on the thing that had given him so much. At the same time, he had confirmed at least some of what the figure had told him. Chapter 503 Doppelganger. Lex looked at the treasure responsible for giving him the system. Although he had many suspicions about what its purpose was, he had no real negative feelings for it. After all, Lex's current life was brought around by the system, and it had been responsible for so many amazing things happening to him. He just wished he could trust it. Lex let go of his soul sense and allowed the treasure to return inside his body. Lex no longer felt like sleeping, so, after scanning the inn once to ensure there were no problems, he spent some time cultivating. He expected that he would make little to no progress in his cultivation, due to the fact that he had entered a new, higher realm and that should have made it harder. But cultivating in a 2.5-star rank environment was really too much of a cheat. He literally felt the energy itself was eager to increase his cultivation. Once he was done with that, he retreated to his office to mull over everything the figure had told him. One of the most interesting things he told him was about the chat room for system wielders. It was something he honestly never even imagined. Time travel, he honestly never even considered it. The whole hassle with changing timelines was too confusing. He also had no interest in traveling to other realms at the moment. So the only two things left to do were to study the patterns and rules of the system and get that treasure. That would be an issue on its own. How was he supposed to get to a specific galaxy, and to a specific place in that galaxy? Even if he used tickets, the options he would get from them were random. This would take some planning. Moreover, he could see through scans that many people were close to discovering some of the entrances to the minor realms. That would also require a lot of his attention, for he really didn't know where those minor realms led to. Larry Dershaw was in a great mood, or as good as he could be. Although he had gotten a hint about who was hunting him, he thought it would take a long time to actually track them down. But just a short while ago, Raphael had reached out to him to let him know that his father was sick of waiting, and was planning on taking matters into his own hands. No matter how things were resolved, one thing was certain: someone was about to get hurt. Other than that, his girlfriend, Irene, was having a few problems of her own as well, back on X-142. But, for reasons no one knew, the family that controlled the planet had suddenly started recruiting cultivators from civilians. She had been selected as well, not for military purposes, but for her expertise in the pharmaceutical industry. Suffice to say, she had started earning really well lately, which had resolved a lot of problems for her. So, with things going well in his own life, as well as his girlfriend's, Larry had every reason to be happy. The sun was shining, the wind was blowing, the rare metal ores were flowing in. From the corner of his eye, Larry saw his good friend, Lex, sitting in the Midnight Manor with a group of strangers. "Hey Lex, guess what?" Larry said as he walked up to the group, but the look he got back from Lex was an unusual one. He couldn't decipher what that look was supposed to mean. "It's a good thing I found you, I was just about to message you anyway. Do you think we could talk for a moment?" Lex looked at Larry for a moment, before looking at the group of guys around him. "Excuse me," he said to his group after a moment and stood up, following Larry to the side. "What's with your accent?" Larry asked, confused for a moment. But he didn't wait long enough to get a reply. "Well, it doesn't matter. You should prepare yourself, even though we had a plan, what we didn't account for was Marlowe. Although you might have talked to him before, he doesn't want to wait any longer. I'll be joining him when he makes his move, and so will many of the others. I wanted to let you know in case you wanted to come as well, since you're the one who provided the lead." Lex did not respond for a moment, and just continued to observe Larry. Just as Larry was beginning to suspect that there might be some issue, Lex spoke. "I think there has been some kind of misunderstanding. My name is William, not Lex. I didn't mean to listen in on your conversation though, you just didn't give me a chance to explain." Larry was startled, and looked again, but the man standing in front of him was completely identical to Lex in every way. The only difference was the accent, which Larry suddenly realized was a result of the IN's universal translator converting some foreign language to English. "I am very curious about this Lex you're talking about. If you mistook me for him, I'm assuming we share some resemblance. If possible, do you think you could introduce me? I think it would be quite interesting to meet a doppelganger." Larry, despite himself, took a step back and looked at William up and down. What the hell just happened? "I can understand why you'd be defensive, you think I cheated you," said William, casually. "Why don't you join me for a bit? I was sitting with my brothers. You can see for yourself if you think I'm trustworthy. Besides, we're at the inn. There couldn't be a safer place." Larry turned to look at the group of guys William had been sitting with before, and they waved at him. They all looked young, maybe a couple years older than him at most. With his own increased strength as of late, he doubted they'd be a match for him. That thought allowed him to relax considerably, and he decided to join him. Besides, he was also curious about why this guy looked exactly like Lex. Chapter 504 Brothers. "Sure, I have some free time, though I'll be meeting my girlfriend here soon," said Larry, as he decided to accompany William. Although he had put on his familiar grin and seemed like a carefree guy, he was cognizant of the fact that he had just revealed some sensitive information to William. Most likely, that information wouldn't mean anything to them, especially if they weren't from Earth, but it was a variable nonetheless. "I didn't catch your name," said William as they walked back. "Larry." "Well Larry, there are my brothers, Jotun, Nissar, Batu, and Henry." The group all waved to Larry from their seats, not bothering to get up. Their casual attire and the various interesting drinks around them really made them seem like a group of guys simply hanging out. "Guys, this is Larry. Apparently, his friend looks a lot like me. I've never met a doppelganger before, so I invited him over. It'll be quite exciting." "Is your friend's name Lex?" Henry asked, looking slightly curious. "Have you seen the guest registry? The top name in that is also Lex." "Oh yeah, I've seen that. I was really surprised since they have the same name, but it's impossible to be my friend. After all, he's even weaker than me." Larry spoke with full confidence, having completely forgotten Lex was Leo due to the Chamber of Secrets. Henry just shrugged, as if it was expected. "What about that Marlowe guy you mentioned?" William asked. "Any chance he might be the one from the registry? That guy is in the top 100. this time. Larry hesitated. He might be, honestly, but I still have my doubts. After all, we're from the same planet. Although he's very powerful on our planet, he only recently reached the nascent realm. I don't see how he could reach the top 100 on that list. I mean, I myself am not even in the top 20,000, but I'm just one cultivation realm below him. How big could the gap be? It's an achievement list, not a strength list. Anything could happen. Hey, you want a drink? Asked Batu, who himself was sipping what looked like some kind of fruit juice. Guys, Larry has to meet his girlfriend soon, so don't fill him up with drinks. We don't want to make a bad impression, said William. Turning to Larry, William said, if these guys try to goad you, ignore them. Other than Jotun, everyone here is a bachelor, so they get jealous. Named after such a prosperous empire, it's no wonder you were able to get a girlfriend so easily, said Larry, completely unaware that it was actually the opposite of what he said. The empire had been named after him, not the other way around. Not a girlfriend, a wife, Jotun clarified with a stern face. Never let her hear you say that, or we're all dead. Never let me hear what? Asked a woman loudly, who suddenly appeared behind Jotun. Larry's eyes constricted a little when he looked at the woman. It was not her astounding beauty that actually got to Larry, but her mature looks. Jotun had actually managed to marry an older woman. Secretly, he gave Jotun a thumbs up. How was he supposed to know the woman was actually several 100,000 years younger than Jotun? While Larry sat amongst a group of truly ancient humans, another ancient being who was formerly human looked at her baby with an endearing look. They were in the makeshift prison beside the greenhouse, where the prisoners who once attacked the End long ago were being kept captive. Many of the pillagers who accompanied them had already become fertilizer, but Lex couldn't bring it to himself to kill prisoners, so he just left them here. It wasn't as if he forgot about them, but since he couldn't think of another solution, he just left them here for the time being. These pillagers were truly the scum of the universe, who took pleasure in looting and killing, and killed more for fun than to steal treasures or wealth. They had only been locked up, and not tortured, but even such a thing had managed to create some level of despair amongst them. It was exactly that despair that was being fed to the Cthulhu baby right now. But while it was barely enough to feed the child, it would not do long term. You'll have to take it out of the inn from time to time. This place is not conducive to the baby's growth. You don't even need to go to any war zones for now, just taking it to any random slum used by any race should be more than enough to feed it during its early days, said Abruptly, the spirit. Why should I take it to a slum? Anita asked, her beauty looking completely out of place in the dungeon. Before I got pregnant with my own children, I had plenty of dungeons back home. Gawain will take him there and feed him properly. I have to serve only the best to my child. None of the prisoners were actually harmed in the feeding process, but the sight of the baby monster had left them scared out of their wits. Once the baby had been fed, Anita had her undead carry it back into its massive stroller, and took it out of the prison. Little Blue had been waiting outside, alongside Fenrir, young MacDonald, and Zen. By hierarchy of the inn, the baby was the junior-most member of their group, with Little Blue the senior-most. Sensing their familiar yet annoying presence, the baby opened its eyes and tried to use its powers on them to scare them away. But its attempts failed miserably. As the youngest brother of the group, the horrid nightmare from the depths of the universe was destined to be the cutest. After all, when Z had been reading a light novel to them all earlier, he clearly told them that when brothers got together, they each had a role based on their seniority. Lex was in his study when Mary appeared suddenly and said, "A guest wants to see you." "It's one of the guests you told me to keep an eye on." Chapter 505, Social Anxiety. "Who is it?" Lex asked as he got up and rubbed his eyes. He had been writing down every major interaction he had with the system as best as he could recall to try and understand what its rules were. There were many things he could explain, but the insistent death threats by the system in his early days and their sudden disappearance was one of the biggest changes he couldn't properly explain. He had a few theories, of course, such as reinforcing the behavior of doing quests. Or perhaps it was just the standard operating procedure for systems. After all, Lex's quests had to do with the inn, but what if he had the murder system? There is no way Lex would have randomly done a quest that involved murder, not unless his own life was on the line. But regardless of what it was or why it stopped, it was certain that giving such quests were the exact reason Lex had such distrust of systems. It is the guest named Alicia, the one who spends all her time with the crabman, John. Oh? Lex was genuinely surprised. He had been thinking of a good way of approaching her, but who knew she would reach out to him first? It was a good thing Lex told Mary to keep an eye on her, or else he would have never even known that she was trying to reach out to him. That was because there were countless guests who would try to meet the innkeeper. Occasionally Lex would take some time and meet some of the guests randomly, but with millions of guests at the inn, it really wasn't feasible to meet everyone. Mary would only ever let Lex know about guests requesting meetings if either Lex had been paying special attention to them, they had genuine concerns that only Lex could resolve, or their identity was special. Of course, Mary had no way of guessing someone's identity just like that, but usually it was easy to find out. "Send her to my office," Lex said as he teleported there. "She's already outside." Once again Lex was taken aback. It seemed the matter was quite serious. But while Alicia was outside Lex's office, it was actually quite difficult for her to make it to Lex. This was because the pressure radiated by the reception hall made it very difficult for her to cross. It was only her sheer desperation that allowed her to cross the room. Lex himself felt quite bad about forcing her through such a situation, especially since he himself wanted to meet her, but the specific functions of buildings given by the system were things he had no control over. He made a mental note not to meet certain guests at the office. Right outside Lex's office, Alicia took a moment to fix her ragged appearance, as best as she could under the circumstances, and then entered the room. "Welcome guest," he said, wearing a gentle, warm smile. "I hope I did not keep you waiting for too long." "No, not at all," she said, her voice barely audible. It was not that she was shy, which she was, but that she had spent so much time alone, she had become unused to speaking, and so had become very soft-spoken. "Excellent. Please, have a seat." Alicia only barely nodded before she scurried to sit in front of the innkeeper, her eyes looking down at her feet. Once upon a time, she wasn't so socially awkward, but now she had become like this. Upon seeing that Alicia herself wasn't about to start the conversation, Lex didn't wait for an awkward silence to fall, and asked, "How can I help you today? Is there something you need?" At the same time, he chastised himself a bit. With Alicia, he had gotten straight to the heart of the topic, while with the Emperor he had so much small talk, because he wanted to get more information on William. No, I mean, yes, actually." Alicia tried to find the words, but the more she messed up, the more she got confused about what to say. From the corner of her eye she peeked at the innkeeper, but found him attentively listening to her ramblings, a warm smile still on his face. He did not seem impatient at all, and was content to let her finish in her own time. A strand of confidence filled her as she paused talking, planned out her sentence in her head, and then said it out loud. "The inn has been great." "No, I mean great." "The inn has been great. But I wondered. I mean, there's another problem that I had, and I wondered if you might be able to help me, actually. Since, the inn, and it's so big, and cool, and powerful." "I mean, you're powerful, not the inn." Lex let out a soft chuckle, and spoke slowly, so as to not alarm her. "It is no trouble at all, though I do not know if I can help you yet. Why don't you tell me what you need, and I'll see if I can find a way to help you out." You see, I have this thing in my head." "No, wait, not in my head, like it's not my imagination, it's real, but I can see it in my head." "I mean, I can't see inside my head, but I can control it with my thoughts, but it's very real. And it's given me a deadline, and I was able to meet the deadline due to the guild room, but now it's giving me more quests and I promise you, this is all real. It's not my imagination. It's..." "Please, guest, calm down," said Lex when he noticed Alicia becoming frantic. His smile was just a little bit larger, but he couldn't help it. He had been looking for ways to broach this topic, but Alicia had done it on her own. You're talking about your system, right? I believe you. Calm down and tell me everything from the beginning. Chapter 506 Deal. Alicia was startled to hear the innkeeper directly mention her system, but then she looked at him with wonder and praise in her eyes. As expected from someone who could run the Midnight Inn. Even though she never mentioned her secret, he already knew. From the beginning, yes. I used to live with my older sister, Sebeline, on a planet called X-144. She used to work as a seamstress and I used to go to school and help her out in my free time. But, one day, everything changed. I was in a flea market, and an old man was selling an old necklace. It wasn't that pretty, but I thought it would look nice if I polished it, so I ended up buying it with the money I had saved up. When I went home and tried to polish it, the necklace accidentally broke. That's when the system first appeared. It called itself the desert farming system, and concluded that I wasn't in a desert, and so it teleported me to one. I was trapped. Alicia suddenly found it hard to speak as she recalled that time, tears welling up in her eyes. Feeling awkward, Lex offered her a handkerchief, though he did not interrupt her. She gladly took it and, after wiping her eyes, managed to continue the story. I was trapped in the desert with no way back. I had no food, no water, no shelter. I thought I was going to die. But fortunately, the system provided me with some water, and seeds that could germinate in the desert, and gave me a quest to grow them. Every day, it only gave me a limited amount of water, some seeds, and instructions on how to grow them. I didn't know what else to do, so I used to eat some of the seeds and plant the rest. I don't know how long it took, days, weeks, maybe years, who knows, but I was able to grow my first plant. Then I got more and more quests. With no way out and nothing else to do, I continued to plant and grow things in the desert, at least that way I had some food to eat rather than seeds. That is until I got the quest to sell the grown vegetables. I failed that quest, because I had no one to sell it to. Then I failed the next one. Then the next one. Then the system said I have to sell the vegetables, and the quest failure would lead to death. Alicia trembled as she recalled the moment when she read that quest for the first time. It was a very difficult day. It was by luck that I ran into John, who gave me a key and brought me to the inn. Here, I was able to sell the vegetables in the guild room and finally fulfilled the quest. But now, I have another quest, and the punishment for failure is death again. Alicia looked at the innkeeper, tears once again swelling in her eyes. I don't want to die. I just want to go back to my sister. Alicia wasn't able to continue speaking as she broke down sobbing. Lex didn't move to stop her, and allowed her to vent her feelings as multiple thoughts ran through his mind. First of all, the way in which she got her system was far too different from Lex. Lex was literally attacked by a shooting star while she got it out of an old necklace. Another difference was that her first few quests didn't threaten death, and only when she repeatedly failed quests did the death threats begin. He also thought about her planet. X-144 wasn't a planet he had ever been to, but he knew about it. It was in the same star system as X-142. When he linked X-142 to the inn, he received an option to link all the planets in the star system with the inn, so long as he paid with MP. He had this option for his other planets as well. He recalled back when he had only a couple planets linked, he thought about purchasing a link to the Earth's moon, which would have cost him around 10,000 MP. Back then, that was an astronomical amount that he could not afford. The issue now, though, wasn't with the planet X-144, but rather Eggless novel, c. This is indeed a matter I can help you with, but there are a couple of issues we need to address first. The girl looked up at the innkeeper with expectant eyes. The first thing we need to know is, was the desert you were teleported to on the same planet that you were on, or another planet entirely? Because even if I remove the system, and give you a way to leave the desert, if you're on some unknown, hostile planet, it could cause problems. I I don't know. I'd never even left my town before. Lex paused for a minute as he genuinely thought of a solution, as he didn't want to just leave her hanging. Fortunately, compared to all the problems he had been facing lately, this was an extremely easy one to resolve. Alright, I've thought of a solution. I can assign a mission in the guild room for someone to find your sister and bring her to the inn. That way, at least for the moment, you two will be reunited. As for your location, we can slowly work on resolving that as well. But first, I have a question for you. Regardless of whatever method we use, you will have to spend some time at the inn. I can sponsor your time here, but I can also offer you a job and allow you to become a worker at the inn. What do you think? Before you answer, though, there is something you need to know. I am not doing all of this out of charity. I can safely remove your system, but in exchange, I will keep the system, and you will have to follow me to the Chamber of Secrets to remove all memory of the system. Is that acceptable to you? For once, tears of happiness filled Alicia's eyes, and she was unable to stop herself from hugging the innkeeper. Of course, considering that she had climbed over his table to do so, it left Lex standing, quite awkwardly, but she didn't think about that at the moment. In her mind, the only thing she could think of was that she was finally about to be free from that accursed system. Chapter 507 The Test. Alicia trembled a little when the innkeeper held her hand, but she quickly steeled herself. Back at his office, after she had recovered, they had hashed out the details of what to do. Alicia would first try to become an employee of the inn, for she felt this place was much safer, as well as more interesting than her town back home. If she became an employee, her sister could live with her as well. The two of them would live happily ever after here. If she couldn't become an employee of the inn, the innkeeper would sponsor her stay long enough for her to raise her cultivation, so that when she returned to the desert, she could easily escape on her own. Moreover, the innkeeper informed her that he had already placed a request for someone to find Sebeline based on her information about her planet and town. Regardless of what happened with her job, she would soon be reunited with her sister. So that only left the matter of removing the system from her. To be honest, now that she was about to lose the system, she was able to admit that there were parts of it she would have missed if she kept her memories. If things had been even slightly different, such as if the system allowed her to teleport to the desert and then back home, she might have actually relished it. But there was no might when it came to these things. Despite the delicious food it gave her, and the water which, to be honest, was also quite delicious, it was not worth everything it took from her. It had barely been a minute since the innkeeper took her hand, and Alicia hadn't even had time to complete her musings, when he took his hand back. A small, shining speck appeared on the tip of his finger, barely larger than a grain of sand. Is that it?" she asked, mesmerized by the sight. How could something so small have caused her so many problems? "Indeed, it is," said the innkeeper, his eyes fixed not at the speck, but at something in the distance. How was Alicia supposed to know that he was reading a system notification of his own? But the next moment, the speck disappeared from his hand and the innkeeper looked back at her. "When you leave this place, you will lose all memory of the system. You will remember your time spent in the desert, and everything else you did there, but the system's involvement will all be erased from your mind. This is for your own protection." I think it's better like this anyway," she said, looking down at her feet. "Good luck on your test. You may find me again if you need anything else." The innkeeper disappeared, leaving a platinum key in Alicia's hand. For a moment, she found it hard to believe she was free of the system and its endless quests. She tried to pull up its panel, but nothing appeared. She tried again, and only when she was certain it was gone, a smile grew on her face. She crushed the key and disappeared. When she appeared again, she was standing in what looked like a small guest room. For some reason, she had forgotten everything about her previous life. She forgot her system, the inn, the innkeeper, John, her sister, and everything else. But she also did not notice that she had lost her memories. The next moment, a man stumbled into the room, bloody and injured. Whether it was by design or luck, the man fell right into a nearby chair. Guest, you're hurt, she said, alarmed, and quickly walked up to him to inspect his injuries. As if by magic, a towel, a bottle of water, a sewing needle, and some thread appeared beside her right hand. By her left hand appeared a bell, which she could ring to call her. Behind her appeared a door. A bloody man walking into a room could be scary, and prompt some to escape based on fear of any danger they might bring. Right above her head appeared an axe, poised and ready to chop the man's head off even in his present condition. Alicia could see some of the jewelry he was wearing. It was worth more money than she'd had her entire life. Egglesnell, though she did not look around, she instinctively knew all the items that surrounded her and their purposes. Yet she did not hesitate to grab the towel and pressed it against the man's bleeding wound. She took the bottle of water and used it to wash off the other bits of his body covered in blood so she could get a better look to see if there were any more injuries. She was so occupied, she didn't notice that the rest of the items in the room disappeared, besides the sewing needle. She had, miraculously, also forgotten that she was originally very shy and timid. "Let me be, woman," the man said gruffly. "I'll be fine. You're injured and bleeding, with possible concussions. So hold still and do what I say. Keep talking, tell me your name. How did you end up like this?" The man struggled to get out of her grip, but despite his inhumane strength, for some reason, he was unable to escape her hold. Eventually he gave up, and listened to her. "My name is Zagan. Some people came into my house and showed a severe lack of decorum. A fight broke out, one thing led to another, and now I'm on a quest for some magic beans that'll lead me to a realm of wonder." "Your arm is dislocated," interrupted Alicia. "I'll have to pop it back. Here, bite this." She bunched up the towel where it was clean and shoved it into the man's mouth. Before he had an opportunity to protest, she had already popped his joint back in its place. The man did not release the scream, or even the groan she expected. Instead, he was looking at her with an irritated look. She shrugged and grabbed the needle and put the thread through it. A strong tolerance meant he wouldn't squirm when she stitched him up. Chapter 508 Seesaw. Lex teleported back to his office, filled with impatience. He'd gotten his hands on a system much quicker than he expected, but then he was suddenly hit with a reminder. While his system upgrades, it would be unavailable to him. That could be problematic. Should he delay the upgrade? No, there would never be a good time for that. He just had to start the upgrade and deal with the situation as best he could. For that, it was best he then go somewhere he did not need to teleport out of. He also took off his host attire and didn't even bother with putting his Clark Kent glasses on. It'd be okay if he spent some time as himself, right? He scanned the inn and discovered that William and his group were still at the Midnight Manor. For whatever reason, they had not left the manor since they had arrived at the inn, so all he would have to do was avoid them. But, even if he didn't, what did it matter? Chances were, William would be just as surprised to see him as he had been. Pushing aside unnecessary thoughts, Lex once again looked towards the system notification he had been reading earlier. System notification, new system detected. Analyzing the secondary system. Desert farming system grade G- detected. Begin assimilation? Y/N. System notification, desert farming system detected. The ignorant assume that a desert is not suitable for farming, but they simply lack the skills. Only the toughest and most valuable plants can grow in the harshest of environments. Whether it is the glaring heat, harsh sunlight, tough soil or loose sand, scarce spirit energy, and severe lack of water, they all allow only the most versatile vegetation to grow, and such vegetation yields the greatest benefits. Shake the cultivation world, and plant cacti that can replace spirit stones, dates that can revive the mortally wounded, and shrubs with more energy than a star. The grade was a lot lower than the previous system Lex had encountered, so hopefully the assimilation would be a lot quicker as well. As for the description, Lex began to suspect that systems also had personalities of their own, and the description came from the system's personality. "Hey Mary, I'm about to upgrade the system, so I'm going to lose connection with it. Will everything at the inn be alright?" Yes, don't worry. Everything existing will continue to operate as usual. If it's anything like last time, the only thing that will be affected is your ability to give new orders, temporarily. And I can't teleport to other planets during this time either, right? No, unfortunately not. In that case, you know what to do. There shouldn't be any problems, considering all our preparations. If anyone wants to meet me, just tell them I'm away. Everything else should continue as normal. Understood. Lex tried to tune into his intuition, to determine if it could give him any warnings about whether he should wait. But it was not responding, which either meant everything was okay, or that in matters related to systems, it didn't work so well. Not one to keep things waiting, Lex chose to begin the assimilation. His system interface disappeared, and instead was replaced by a single word, updating. Lex felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that his system was about to be upgraded. He wondered what new functions it would get. Considering the low grade of the absorbed system, he might not get so many. Whatever it was, he hoped it would be suitable for an inn. But, with his system interface gone, Lex was suddenly out of things to do. Well, not completely. There was one more thing he had been thinking about doing for a long time, one which did not require his identity as the innkeeper or the functionality of the system. Cracking his knuckles, Lex began to walk in a certain direction. He calculated how much free time he had. The Grand Prix would be held in 2 more days, and though he did not expect the system to come back online by then, he should at least be done with his current task. After all, how long would it take? Instead of taking a golf cart, Lex took his time and casually strolled through the inn, taking in all the sights. But it did not take long for his stroll to end, for he reached his destination, the mystery trial. Since Lex had gotten this unique reward from the system, he had been thinking about trying it out, yet he was always too preoccupied to try. Now was the perfect time. From what he recalled, the mystery trial would give each person who entered a different trial, based on their skills. The main purpose of the trial was to improve their skills, though when someone completed the trial, they would also get a small reward. The first entry was free for everyone, and every subsequent entry would cost 500 MP. Lex was slightly curious what his trial would be, but there was no point in wondering. It was much easier to just enter and find out. Lex walked into the trial and was enveloped in darkness. It seemed like only a moment, but when the darkness retreated, he found himself in one of 7 seats around a rectangular table. 5 other people sat around him, and a man in a very iconic mask was sitting at the head of the table, a revolver placed right in front of him. Lex immediately tried to get up, considering the fact that he had a strong feeling towards where this was heading, yet he could not move. He looked down and saw that his legs were chained to the chair, which had been bolted to the ground. Egglesnell, he looked up once again at the man with the white mask. Fake hair came out from beside the mask, and red circles were drawn on each cheek. Though the red-painted lips of the mask did not move, a sound came from behind it. "Would you like to play a game?" the man asked, his creepy voice giving each person on the table chills. The mask was from the famous horror movie Seesaw. Chapter 509 Purpose. Lex looked at the 5 others who were chained to their chairs as well, but did not recognize any of them. He tried to use his spirit sense to see if he could learn anything else, but discovered that not only did his spirit sense not exist, he had none of his cultivation, either. He was back to being a mortal human. The revelation did not scare Lex, though it did make him realize the peril of his predicament. He could not just shrug away a shot from that gun, like he had assumed. But since Lex knew death in the mystery trial would not translate to death in real life, he was not worried. All this meant was that Lex would have to play by the rules of the trial. Suddenly, another thought occurred to him. Other than polishing whatever skill the trial thought Lex had, this was actually pretty fun. It was like playing a video game, but with ultra-realism. Of course, Lex could only think so because he had long become immune to feeling fear in such situations. Any normal person would be highly intimidated even if they knew the trial would not harm them in real life, because regardless of anything else, it felt real. "Who are you? What the hell is happening?" Do you know who I am? Do you know who my father is? Yelled one of the people tied to the chair, with equal measures of anger and fear in his voice. The others also started struggling to get out of their chairs as panic set in. Yet the man at the head of the table seemed unperturbed. Calmly, he picked up the revolver from the table and fired a single round into the air, causing everyone to freeze and stare at him in fear. The tension that filled the room was palpable, and Lex calmly took everything in as he tried to understand the objective of the trial. A faint smell of burnt gunpowder reached him, before it was overpowered by a more revolting smell, the smell of fear. Someone at the opposite end of the table had wet themselves. If it had been someone on Lex's side, he would have at least seen it. Trying not to let the smell bother him, Lex diverted his attention from the masked man to the other people present. There were 3 guys and 3 girls, all of various ages and ethnicities. There did not seem to be a pattern in their selection. Good. Now that everyone has calmed down, we can focus on the truly important things. The man placed his revolver down on the table and reached into his pocket to pull out a new deck of cards. Eggless novel C.O.M. Although, that in itself is such an obtuse statement, is it not? What really is important in life? The man talked slowly, emphasizing his pronunciation of each word, as if he could not tolerate a single mistake. Upon noticing that, Lex began noticing other details of the man. His clothes, although not new, were finely pressed without a single crease in them. He was wearing fine, black leather gloves that had the faint indication of use, but remained neat and tidy. We hear in the media that it's important to enjoy the small things in life, the little moments. To stop and smell the roses, enjoy the journey along the way, and such. He neatly unwrapped the plastic, sealing the case for the cards, before taking the cards out and removing the 2 jokers. Then he began shuffling. I have my own theory about what's important in life, though. I think, in life, it's important to live, rather than just exist. His technique in shuffling formed an even rhythm, the sound of new cards smoothly sliding over one another, forming a soft din in the silence between the man's words. But what does that even mean, to live? It's philosophical, but at the same time, I think it's rather simple. It means to do things with purpose. To wake up early when you can sleep in, for you have a direction. To wear a certain set of clothes over another, because they will serve you better in different circumstances. To have each and every action filled with meaning, all working towards a specific goal. Lex wondered if the monologue was for him to hear specifically, or it was just the character of the man at the head of the table. He still could not exactly determine what his trial's purpose was. But in the mundane life, we often confuse simply existing with having purpose. We wake up early to go to work, to earn money, to eat food, to continue living so that at some given interval of life you may experience pleasure. There are a lot of actions there, and they all give the illusion of purpose, but ultimately, it is just an illusion. So then, we now identify another aspect of life that is important. To try to differentiate between living with purpose and just existing. But for beginners, it can be difficult. So let's try something simple, The purpose right now is to survive, and the action is to play a game. So, in summary, let's play a game with the very important purpose of survival. The man quickly began sliding cards to each of the people chained up to the chair, his actions fluid and precise. Even though Lex was at the far end of the table, 3 cards smoothly slid across the table to him, stopping just within the limited reach of his chained hands. Various thoughts went through Lex's mind as he absorbed everything that was happening around him, from the softly sobbing girls to the hyperventilating old man. But, most of all, Lex was observing the actions of the man at the head of the table. Though he had not yet discovered the purpose of the trial, he decided to stop observing silently and try to participate. After all, he doubted his special skill was just playing games. Before the man was able to put away the deck and continue his speech, Lex spoke. Didn't you just say we should live life with purpose? So why are you depriving yourself of the purpose you're providing us? Deal some cards for yourself and join us. Or else, how will you know if you're simply existing as a dealer, or actually living life? A few things changed as soon as Lex spoke, and he immediately understood what the purpose of the trial was. Chapter 510 Bond. Various graphs and numbers appeared above the heads of everyone else at the table, and looking at them, Lex was able to clearly determine the mental condition of everyone there. Suffice to say that almost everyone was doing horribly, or so it seemed on the surface. Other than Lex and the man at the head of the table, both of whom were relatively calm, there were two other people with surprising emotions. One was the old man who was hyperventilating. Although it seemed like his condition was terrible, in fact, he was quite calm internally. He was using his age and his condition to try to draw sympathy from the group, for he could see no other advantage he could gain at the moment. The other was a girl who was sitting directly opposite to Lex. She was as pale as a ghost and trembling like she had a cold, but internally she was paying close attention to everyone. Unlike the old man who was only trying to gain sympathy, she was filled with a cold and calculating calm, ready to pull down anyone else to save herself. And if she couldn't be saved, she would bring down everyone with her. But while the graphs and numbers appeared suddenly as he spoke, and even changed when he was done speaking, a few seconds later, they disappeared. It seemed that Lex would only be able to determine their mental state as a reaction to things he said. In which case it was evident that the trial had something to do with Lex's ability to speak, or perhaps maneuver the situation based on what he said. But he was not clear of what the objective was. Was it to somehow simply survive, or was it to keep the entire group alive as well? Lex could not see the man's expression due to it being hidden behind the mask, but from the fact that he had stopped for a few seconds and continued to stare at Lex was also a clue. He had to have a clear idea of what was going through the other's head if he was going to manipulate him. Due to the continued silence, fear filled the hearts of those sitting on the table, and everyone looked towards Lex with hearts filled with anger and grievance, but Lex maintained his casual demeanor. "You are not wrong," the man finally said, dealing himself 3 cards as well. Since everyone's cards were upside down, no one could tell what they were, and since the pack was new, there was no tell or indicators on the cards at all. Why should I deprive myself of glorious purpose? We should all go through this journey together. Let me explain the rules to everyone. This is a special game, made just for us. You see, since we're learning about life, I had to emulate it as well. Some people are born with more luck than others, while others use the hand dealt to them and turn things around. So, like life, you all have been dealt a hand. The game will consist of 3 rounds. In each round, you may look at your cards and trade one. The man took the top card from the deck and slid it to the center of the table, still upside down. The only premise it, you cannot look at the card you're trading for. Starting with someone random, everyone will take a turn to either trade for the card in the center of the table, or pass. If you trade, you put a card upside down, and take the card at the center of the table. What you get will once again be dependent on luck. Once everyone has had a turn, the second round will start, and I will give everyone one more card. Like this, we will do a total of 3 rounds. At the end of the 3 rounds, everyone reveals their hand, and we move on to the next aspect of life, survival of the fittest. We'll use poker rules to determine which hand is the best, but instead of looking for the best, we'll be looking for the person with the weakest hand. Whoever has the weakest hand will recuse themselves from future games, let's say. Since we're repeating the number 3 so many times, let's say we'll play a total of 3 games. How does that sound? Previously, everyone had about a 50% chance to survive, which made the game feel pretty intense. But, since I've been asked to join the game, I'm sure it will be even more interesting. Let's hope I'm not the first one to lose, leaving you all tied to your chairs, unable to get out. The entire group collectively gave Lex a death stare, but the man himself didn't seem to be too bothered by it. Instead, his gaze was stuck on the cards he had received. Originally, he was wondering what strategy to use, which is why he picked up his cards. But mere seconds after he picked up his cards, the numbers on them disappeared. It was evident what the trial was telling him. He would not escape this predicament using cards. He had to rely on his words to manipulate the situation, and somehow free himself and the others. This was, actually quite exciting. With a smile, Lex put down his cards and looked the man at the head of the table in the eyes. "That's quite the game," he said warmly. "Should we introduce ourselves? No fun in playing with strangers." The moment he said those words, information appeared in his head about his identity and backstory for this trial. "The name's Bond." "Covalent bond," said Lex, with a smile that was much too unusual for the given situation. Egglesnell, one of the girls at the table, burst into tears the moment Lex introduced himself, making the tense situation feel awkward. "I don't know her, I swear," said Lex once again. The first thing he had to do was take the masked man's power away. Psychotic people who would do such a thing would love the feeling of being in control, so Lex had to first take that control away from him. Lex was confident that the man wouldn't break his own rules and harm Lex prematurely. But Lex also knew he only had one game to get out of this predicament. After all, with blank cards, he couldn't really hope to win the game normally. Chapter 511 Strategy. Everyone ignored Lex's paltry attempt at cracking a joke. Sure, the timing of the girl bursting into tears and him introducing himself set him up for a gag, but no one felt like entertaining stupid jokes. Or any jokes, for that matter. That much was clear to Lex, even if he didn't look at the data that everyone revealed in response to his words. But that didn't matter. What was important was to break the environment that the man at the head of the table was trying to create and steal the momentum of the situation. By having him participate in the game, Lex had lowered his standing in the situation, and while they had not really become equals, since Lex was tied up and the man had the gun, it did bring them closer together. "Fun?" the man asked, picking up his cards and looking at them. "Sure, I guess that's important, too. While it is not on the same level as living with purpose, there is no reason why you cannot learn to enjoy the difficult moments in life. It'll even make them go by easier." Slowly and deliberately, the man removed a single one of the cards in his hand and swapped it for the one in the center of the table. Despite staring as closely as possible to the man's eyes, Lex was unable to determine his emotions in response to the card he picked up. "You can call me the Game Master." The Game Master paused and turned to look at the girl on his left. "You can go next. The round will progress clockwise." The girl was pale with fear and trembling softly in her seat. There must have been a hit of adrenaline when she realized what situation she was in, but it was already wearing off, leaving her exhausted. It was clear that she did not have the best physical health, and probably not the best mental health either. "Relax, just look at your cards and introduce yourself," said Lex. "I don't see how you could make the situation any worse." The woman with puffy red eyes looked at Lex, then at her cards. She managed to peek at them before she put them back down and whispered, "Paula." It seemed she was only capable of saying so much and didn't intend to exchange any cards. With the formation of some kind of pattern, the next two managed to introduce themselves as well, and both of them exchanged cards, finally bringing the focus onto Lex, who was next. All eyes on the table were on him as Lex appeared to be choosing which card to exchange. Lex thought the Game Master might become impatient with Lex's actions, but no such thing happened. Lex quickly analyzed the man in his head based on the few clues he had picked up. The man was extremely neat and tidy, to the point it became a peculiarity or obsession. He also seemed to have a logic driving his actions, however twisted it might be, but Lex was able to influence him within the realm of his own logic. He was extremely patient, as not once had he lashed out at Lex for misbehaving, nor had he tried to interfere with any of Lex's actions. He also had a bit of an ego, although he may have confused his own inflated ego for self-confidence or perhaps an inherent superiority. Lex was able to derive this based on the condescending manner in which he explained to all his victims why his actions were full of purpose as well as filled with benevolence to the survivors, or as he perceived it, those who had discovered the meaning of having purpose behind their actions. It seemed that Lex's original plan to make him act out would be unlikely, due to his extreme patience and self-confidence. But that did not mean he could not be manipulated. He clearly had very strong emotions regarding his ideology, regardless of how flawed it was. As long as Lex played by the Game Master's rules, he could use his ideology against him. With a new plan of action decided, Lex's smile widened, just a bit, and he looked the game master right in his eyes. Lex mimicked the way in which the game master pulled out one of his cards and began to replace it. Although you all already know my name, let me introduce myself a little bit more. I am a very big believer in attaining positive results, and I believe the greatest positive result can better be achieved with quality, rather than quantity. Lex picked up the card that was facing down and looked at it. The number on the card disappeared, but Lex grinned widely, as if he had gotten exactly what he wanted. A layer of subtlety was added to the game now, as the person who played right before Lex knew exactly what card she had placed. Based on Lex's grin, she began calculating what hand Lex was trying to build to get an advantage. At the same time, whoever would pick up the card after Lex would believe that they would get a hint of the cards Lex did not need. None of this had anything to do with the game master, but it had vast implications on the fluctuating emotions of the group. Lex could not forget them while he tried to manipulate the game master, for they were variables as well. Some of them had plans and strategies of their own, and Lex had to make sure to have them work with him instead of against him. This was more complicated than he had thought, but Lex decided to continue with the plan he had concocted, and adapt as the situation demanded. For example, Lex continued to speak. After this game ends, there will be 4 survivors with a new understanding of living with purpose. The world will be changed for it, or at least the worlds of those 4 people will be changed. But is the value of 4 people with a new understanding greater, or is one extremely capable and driven person developing a deep and profound appreciation of living with purpose more? Instead of looking at the game master, Lex looked at the next person in line after him and asked, "What do you think? Which is worth more?" Chapter 512 Provoke. The person sitting next to Lex looked him in the eyes. Although he had been scared and panicked when he woke up in his current predicament, he had calmed down enough to think. It was clear to him, and everyone else, that Lex was trying to do something. Most likely he was trying to escape, which made the most sense. But he honestly saw no way they could get out of the situation. In which case, what he had to do was to make sure he didn't get dragged into any extra trouble. "I think the more the merrier," the man managed to say without stuttering. One person alone gaining an appreciation for living with purpose is just one person alone. How can he compete with more people? The man didn't know what purpose Lex had, but it seemed like he wanted to assure his own survival in exchange for giving up the rest, so he couldn't agree to what Lex said. But he did not realize that he had reacted exactly how Lex wanted. "You know what, you're right. I was wrong. I was too caught up in the quality versus quantity thing, but there's no reason why it can't be both." No matter how weak and hurried it was, Lex wanted to set a precedent for someone changing their views when encountering a better alternative. He did not expect to have the game master change his plans by reasoning with his better judgment. No, by doing this, Lex was a seed in the game master's subconscious, letting him think that changing his views was an option. He did not know how much such a thing would help, but he needed to get all the aid he could because his actual plan was a lot more aggressive and could backfire just as easily. Of course, knowing the game master's emotions due to the data provided by the trial would make it much easier for him to achieve such a thing. For the rest of the round, Lex did not speak, and maintained a casual, yet confident smile. The remaining players introduced themselves and exchanged some cards, not saying anything unnecessary. When it was once again the game master's turn, he turned to look at Lex, as if to see if he had anything to say. Without averting his gaze, the man picked up the deck and in a familiar, fluid motion, slid one more card to each person. "Can you feel your heart beating?" the game master asked. He was likely addressing the whole group, but his eyes never left Lex. "Is the weight of your decision haunting your every thought? Do you feel alive? But are you really living with purpose, and making decisions for that purpose, or are you still just existing? Is it just enough to pick up cards and hope you have the best hand? What about messing with others to influence what they do? For example, what would you think if I tell you, I only need one more king, and I'll be all but certain of passing the round? Many expressions across the table suddenly changed, and one of the contestants even pulled his cards closer together. But his sudden and obvious movement drew a lot of attention, and he suddenly realized that he had revealed at least one of his cards to the group. The semblance of calmness that Lex had managed to create earlier was already gone. "Now why would you do that, I wonder?" mused Lex aloud, not even bothering to look at his new card. "What is the purpose behind your action? Is it to make the game more aligned with the unpredictable nature of the world, or is it just to provide a tinge of pleasure to a small man with a wounded ego and inferiority complex?" Everyone turned to look at Lex with horror in their eyes. He had been vocal from before, but he had never insulted the game master like that. He was just asking for death. "What about you?" asked the game master, his voice perfectly calm still. "What purpose is guiding your actions? Do you want to provoke me? Do you think you can somehow escape the inevitable show of hands at the end if you find some other way out?" The game master picked up the new card he had given to himself and nodded, before adding it to the ones in his hand. "Do I even need to provoke you?" Lex asked, shaking his head. "It won't matter if I do. For someone who speaks so much about living with purpose instead of just existing, it is fairly obvious that you're also merely existing within your own prison." "Existing? I am not existing," the game master said with enthusiasm bordering on aggression. This was the first time he showed any emotion other than absolute calm. "I am breaking every norm, every convenience, every rule just to follow my purpose. My existence itself is wreaked with purpose." "Sure you are," said Lex in a sarcastic tone. "I am the one living with purpose, not you. You may think that you are, because how out of the ordinary your actions seem, but I can see right through you. You don't believe in purpose. You just believe in indulging your mental illness. And no, I'm not referring to kidnapping and threatening people as mental illness. No, I'm referring to the part of your brain that defined the perfect rules you have to live by. The part that perfectly defined what purpose is. The part of your mind that told you doing things a certain way is living with conscious intention instead of a sickness. The part of your brain that carefully designed each stage of this game we're playing. I bet you even have a few ways to make the game more interesting, already planned. At the relevant round, you'll slowly introduce more and more complications, all the while telling yourself that you're just adding more layers to the game to promote the players to live with purpose. I bet it's not even limited to that, is it? I bet your purpose has infiltrated every facet of your life." Lex chuckled as he noticed the game master softly trembling beneath his mask, though the numbers above his head clearly let Lex know how the man was feeling. He continued to press on. Chapter 513 On Purpose. The room was very still, and not even the sound of breathing could be heard. Everyone held even their breaths as they silently listened to Lex, but dared to not even look at him. This guy was about to die, they were sure of it. It's a strange thing, isn't it, to be a prisoner of your own mind, but have the illusion that you are free. I bet you always do everything exactly the same way and think that you've designed the most efficient system, but the truth is, you have to do things exactly the way your mind likes it. You're holding your cards in your left hand, but you always pick them out with your right. I'm guessing when you're putting on gloves, you always put on the one on your right hand first." For the first time, there were rapid fluctuations in the numbers above the game master's head, and Lex knew he was on the right path. He had to push him, just enough. "I bet it's even more than that. I bet you get dressed in the exact same order every time, but you probably don't even realize it. Let me guess, pants first, then the shirt. Are you dressing up like that on purpose, or are you just existing within the prison that is your mind?" Lex stared intently at the numbers atop the game master, and knew it was time to stop. He had primed the man, but he couldn't immediately begin the next stage of the plan. Everything had to be done systematically. Leaning back in his chair, Lex made eye contact with the person whose turn it was next and gave her a subtle nod. She hesitated, but seeing how no one was speaking or doing anything, she picked up her cards and chose not to exchange anything. Although her actions were minimal, the chains that had wrapped her legs clinked with every movement she made. It was not a silent affair even though she did almost nothing, and the tense atmosphere amplified the noise tenfold. But neither Lex said anything, nor did the game master. The next person, however, did not choose to mimic her predecessor's actions. Not only did she exchange her turn by saying, "I have two kings." Everyone in the room turned to look at her, Lex and the game master included. There was no way to determine if she was telling the truth, but her choice of statement was a spark on a bed of dry leaves. Lex chuckled and said, "What a coincidence, I have a king as well." "Are you just taking every possible opportunity to try and tick me off?" the game master asked, hiding his irritation well. "Unlike you, who is bound by the rules and has no freedom to do what he wants, I can do whatever suits my needs. But you can't hurt me even if you want to, because that goes against the rules for the game, doesn't it? I mean, you could try to prove that your actions follow your purpose by killing me, and not some invisible rules that hold you in a prison, but then it'll just seem to everyone like you're just trying to vent. No one will believe you. And after that, the whole point of this exercise will be moot. Everyone will follow along with your rules and play your game. But they won't be learning to have their actions be motivated by purpose. No, they'll just be learning to silence any and all complaints and just follow the invisible rules holding them in place. They'll be the perfect puppets for society." Lex leaned forward, as much as he could, and looked at the game master dead in the eyes. "The truth is, buddy, of all of us here, you're the one living with the least amount of purpose. I might be the one in chains, but you're the real prisoner. Because the worst comes to worst, I'll die. But you can either die from your own game, a prisoner to the rules that your mind created, or you'll survive, and continue to live as a prisoner." Lex paused for a moment, to let his words sink in, before leaning back once again. "Unless that is, you prove once and for all, you're not the prisoner. No, you're the one choosing your own actions, even if your brain, your captor, is telling you otherwise. Break the rules of the game completely. Take control of your own life, by ending your own life." Lex was looking at the game master with eager eyes. He could see the numbers above everyone and he knew the emotions that were running rampant in the room. He also knew that his final delivery had been a little too premature, and that the game master wouldn't end up doing it. But he had done that on purpose. Lex no longer cared about completing the mystery trial. No, he wanted to go through the same trial again and again, learning how everyone reacted to his different approaches. This time, he played the game master, and he knew that if he had done things just slightly differently, he would have won. Next time, he wanted to see if he could get one of the other captors to give up on the game on purpose. His greatest skill, as it turned out, was reading people and having them do exactly what he wanted. Perhaps this was a skill he always had, or something he had learnt while dealing with so many precarious situations at the inn. Regardless, he was having fun now, and he wasn't going to stop anytime soon. Back at the Midnight Inn, Larry ended up leaving William and his brothers because his girlfriend had finally arrived. What he didn't know was that after he left, William disappeared from the inn. It would be impossible for him to reach the William family home planet within a few years minimum because he was in a different galaxy, but that didn't mean he couldn't contact them from where he was. Using a special formation, he allowed a projection of himself to appear within a sacred temple, guarded by his family's most trustworthy and prominent members. "Ancestor," one of them immediately exclaimed in alarm. This was the first time he had made an appearance in that guard's lifetime, but he didn't care about such things. "Find all the information we have on a planet called Earth. And get the family registry while you're at it. I want to know if I have a descendant," called Lex Williams. Chapter 514 Family. Damien Arbin William, Lex's grandfather, was filled with both excitement and fear as he hurried to the Ancestor Temple. He was excited, for their family had been ignored by their ancestor for too long, not that he could blame him. Even with his prestigious position in the family, he himself was only an Earth immortal. That meant any common general in the Jotun army was stronger than him based on cultivation alone. Naturally, just because he was an Earth immortal, it did not mean that was the peak strength of their family, far from it. But it was generally accepted that they were only equal to a normal noble family of the empire, and not one of the top 4, like they should have been. So, he harbored a great hope that their ancestors' attention would spark the fire of their family's growth. But the tinge of fear in his heart was not without cause as well. He had heard that the ancestor had asked about Lex, his grandson, who he knew absolutely nothing about. His greatest fear was that his son had done something to cause the ancestor's ire. After their last meeting, his son and his wife had completely disappeared. Let alone him, even his 3 granddaughters did not know where they had gone. But there was no point in guessing. He took a moment to straighten himself out, before he hurriedly entered the temple. The ancestor's projection was standing with his hands held behind his back, an impassive look on his face. He did not recognize Damien, for it had been too long since he interacted with the family. Great ancestor, my name is Damien, the current presiding family head. I have retrieved all the information you desired. Tell me about Earth, William said directly, not displaying any of the friendliness he did around his brothers. It's a planet that falls under the William family territory in the Milky Way, and is deep inside a dead zone. At the behest of the Empire, a prisoner, Batet, had been kept on the planet as it was one of the few inhabited planets in the dead zone. Due to the lacking spiritual presence on the planet, the prisoner could not recover enough strength to leave without the aid of technology. Forget that. What I want to know is, are there any members of the William family on Earth? The Lex Williams, I mentioned, is he a descendant? Damien smiled awkwardly, but did not hide anything. There was a descendant living on Earth, my son, Leon. He got married to someone from that planet and started a family there. I believe. Lex is his son. Started a family on Earth? Why did he start a family in the dead zone? William was genuinely confused. There was no real benefit to such a thing. There were a few rumors that cultivating in an area lacking spirit energy strengthened the cultivation as it was forced to do more work for the same results, but there was no actual proof. Damien cleared his throat, but reported the situation honestly and without adding any bias to make himself look good or bad. William listened silently, without expressing any approval or disapproval. He was the last person qualified to comment on family drama. Instead, his focus remained on Lex for 2 very specific reasons. One was obviously the fact that they had a similar appearance. That in itself should not have mattered, except that he had originally suspected a similar appearance was a sign of him unlocking the bloodline William had created. The second was the name on the top of the guest registry. He still did not think his descendant had any real connection to the person whose name was atop the list, but there was no harm in investigating. As for the bloodline matter, your suspicion about him awakening the bloodline is probably incomplete. If his mother really is as skilled as you say, and was able to give her 3 daughters all exceptional skills, then it's likely that not only did Lex unlock his bloodline, it may have undergone a mutation. Damien was startled, for he had not even considered such a thing. Successful bloodline mutations were exceedingly rare, because any mutation would usually result in the death of whoever had it. A successful mutation meant an evolution of a bloodline that his incredibly powerful ancestor was able to make. Such a thing, it was impossible, right? Make a file, list down every major thing that has happened in the family in the last few thousand years. I'll be coming back soon. The hologram disappeared, and Damien breathed a sigh of relief that the ancestor did not blame him. But his mind quickly went to the matter about Lex. Even if it was a bloodline evolution, there was no need to hide Lex from them. He suspected the matter was even more complicated than that. Adrift was on top of the world. From the moment he had AI take over his cultivation technique, his real progress had been amazing. He suspected it would take a couple of days at most to enter the next realm. To celebrate, he had come to the Midnight Inn, and upon the insistence of a few friends, entered the Henali portal. Apparently, its VR was ultra-realistic and would allow him to feel like he was exploring the universe. But unbeknownst to him, the moment he entered the portal, a hidden signal was sent out. Protected by the system, his location at the inn had been hidden, but his origin on Earth could not be protected. But nothing else happened afterwards. Adrift continued to enjoy the portal, and his cultivation technique kept running in the background. Several hours later, when he exited the portal, he had a lavish meal with a few other friends and decided to partake in the inn's festival. Life had never been this good for him, and it was bound to only get better in the future. Chapter 5:15, Something New. Lex exited the mystery trial 8 hours later, finally having completed the trial. It was a genuinely interesting experience, and he learned a lot. Moreover, he would call the reward anything but small or insignificant. Although he had yet to try it out, he gained a sixth sense for detecting people's emotions in reaction to something he said. Well, to be fair, the actual sixth sense was very vague and weak, but it was drastically amplified by Lex's intuition. But even without the gift, Lex had gained a whole new perspective about his ability to influence people with his words. In the end, he had completed the trial by convincing the game master that the only way to actually prove that he was motivated by purpose was to break his own rules and set them free. He had tried a few other tactics, which did not contribute towards the trial, but did provide him with unique experiences. After all, he would never harm an innocent person in real life. Lex was wondering if he should go try out his ability or spend some more time enjoying himself when he, unexpectedly, heard a familiar sound. New notification. System upgrade complete. System status updated. System, Midnight Inn. System grade, Divine, Broken SSS, B+. System owner, Lex Williams. System functionality, 14%. System self-repair time, 33,310 billion years. New notification. New features unlocked. New features include Desert Farm. Well of Invigoration. The system was back online. In a single day. Lex was surprised, but after looking at his notification, he realized that it was probably because the system he absorbed was too weak. His system functionality had only improved 2% and the self-repair time had also only gone down by 2 billion. The system grade hadn't even changed. Shaking his head, Lex turned and looked at the two new features of the inn. Desert Farm. A farm where desert plants can be grown, in addition to any other plants. Non-desert plants undergo an unpredictable mutation to grow in this farm. All plants that grow in the desert farm have additional medicinal, nutritional, or spiritual properties. Well of Invigoration. A well with water that has special properties which speeds up plants' growth without causing any adverse effects. It also has mild medicinal properties if drunk directly, and can heal hidden injuries within the body. There were only two new features, but Lex liked them a lot more than the ones he got from the murder system. Moreover, this would be more beneficial to the day-to-day operations of the inn. Lex was already dissatisfied with the kind of ingredients the inn had, as they could not provide him any nutrition now that he was in the golden core realm. With this, he now had the opportunity to grow ingredients of a high enough level to satisfy himself now, and in the future as well. Of course, it wasn't as if he wasn't planting crops that targeted golden core cultivators even now. But the difference was, their maturity period was phenomenally long. Even with all the advantages the inn provided, it would take well over a year for them to mature. Maybe now, with the water from the well, that period could be sped up. Lex smiled and disappeared, teleporting to the turtle in his host attire. The turtle had buried itself in the ground, with only its head above the ground. Lex did not even try to question what bizarre thing the turtle was doing now, and instead got right to the point. I'm opening up a new farm, but it will be in a desert environment. It can cause mutations to normal plants, and provides a huge boost to plants that grow in a desert environment to begin with. I also have a new well that can boost the speed of plant growth. I thought it would interest you to know. For a moment, the turtle did not react, but then it turned to look at Lex. Oh dear, oh dear. That sounds lovely, but I have run into a small little bit of a problem. Even as the innkeeper, Lex raised an eyebrow as he looked at the turtle in curiosity. The turtle had run into a problem? This was a first. After all my time at the inn, I have grown a lot. I am ready to grow to the next cultivation level. But my age is too young, my body has not grown enough yet. I will need to eat a few shining irisberry fruits to allow my body to grow. If I don't get them soon, I will fall asleep for a few hundred years until my body is ready to grow. That was indeed a huge problem. He could not afford to allow the turtle to fall asleep, he was extremely dependent on it. I'll take care of it, said Lex, and teleported away. He immediately thought of the Infinity Emporium, as it was his best bet at getting it quickly. But he decided to check out the fruit on the Henali portal first to get an idea of how rare it was. Yet when he teleported to the portal, he paused and turned his head in a certain direction. His intuition was acting up, telling him something major was about to happen. Unable to identify the cause, he scanned the inn, and noticed something odd. Ragnar was standing alone in his abode, wearing nothing but a cotton tunic. This was the first time Lex saw the man without his armor, and discovered that the previously seemingly buff man had actually just been wearing very thick armor. In actuality, he had a very toned physique. But the general changing out of his armor was not enough to alarm Lex's intuition. No, it was the dark cloud that was forming above his head that attracted Lex's attention. Unlike all the previous tribulations Lex had seen, this one was different. Black lightning streaked around the cloud, building up its strength. Lex had no idea what kind of tribulation Ragnar was about to encounter, but it was definitely much more dangerous than the ones he had seen before. Yet the man was not using a tribulation room. With nothing but his courage supporting him, the general looked up into the sky. There was no hesitation in his eyes. Chapter 516, The Back That Will Never Bend. It was not just Lex whose attention was attracted towards the unusual tribulation cloud. Most of the demons who had already passed through their tribulation and survived looked over. Hundreds of beasts looked up in fear as their strong instincts were kicking up. Jotun, who was having an important meeting with his wife, was also alarmed, and quickly exited the manor and flew up into the air. The guard who had replaced the griffin looked there as well, though it did not display the same shock as the others. Somewhere in the crowd of guests, Booty looked up into the sky. Every time he saw lightning, he felt nervous. The captain of the Iron Heart Pirates was about to enter the immortal realm, but he had already seen too many fail in their tribulations. Every time he saw one more, he felt his heart tremble. For a time, the entire inn came to a standstill as they looked up at the ominous black lightning. Lex, who was also watching the spectacle closely, however, did not just sit and watch. His intuition was warning him that whatever protection he had given the abode was not enough, and so silently, he began arranging more formations around Ragnar's abode. The formations were not to protect Ragnar from the tribulations, since the man himself had opted not to enter the tribulation room. Instead, it was to contain the damage within the confines of the abode itself. But the thing was, he added one formation, then 10, then 50, but the warning from his intuition never ceased. The level of formations available to Lex, even with the extra capabilities of the event panel, were not enough to contain the danger of this lightning. As the sound of rolling thunder swept across the inn, Lex suddenly began to panic. Without thinking too much, Lex directly spent 10 billion MP on smashing as many formations down as possible. But he did not have time to evaluate if that was enough. The sound of the thunder changed, as if the heaven itself was releasing a growl aimed at Ragnar. Dozens of formations around the abode were thoroughly crushed just from the sound. But the process was not slow, as all this happened faster even than anyone, immortals and mortals alike, could understand. Then the lightning struck, a single black bolt aiming directly for Ragnar. If he had wanted to defend, he should have done so already, for it was too late now even for him. The black lightning bearing the wrath of heaven and hell bore down on the lone man. Existence itself seemed to fracture where the lightning passed, leaving behind a trail of minuscule cracks in space. At that moment, the air ceased to exist, and all light was destroyed. Despite the intense power and heat of the lightning, there were no flames in its aftermath, for the very existence of fire had been destroyed. In that moment, despite the protection of the inn, everyone, the Emperor, devils, and even Lex included, suffered from a hallucination. For a moment, they saw an impossible tide of darkness swallowing up the universe itself, filled with righteous fury. But in front of that darkness that swallowed everything, there was a single, minuscule speck that remained undeterred. It was not the flame of hope, nor the prayers of a trillion meditating monks, nor the blessing of some deity that remained unmoving in front of that invading abyss. No, it was a man in a simple cotton tunic. Even as the world faded into nothingness, even as the emotions of everyone watching faded, even at the very end of things, his back did not bend. The hallucination changed. They saw a young man standing side by side with 1,000,000,000 soldiers. They saw war. They saw death. They saw defeat. They saw a sea of endless demon corpses, and they saw a young recruit alive, crying because he was buried under the bodies of his comrades, who had given up everything to let him live. The scene changed. They saw retreating spaceships. They saw bleeding soldiers. They felt the endless silence of space, and in it, they saw demons in the form of space worms chasing after them. They saw an escape vessel heading towards the demons while the other ships escaped, and a skinny, injured soldier with nothing but a blaster and a broken sword. They saw a fight that should have been suicide. Then they saw another. Then they saw 100 more. They saw a skinny, fragile back slowly gain muscle and grow stronger. They saw one impossible tide of death crash against a lone soldier again and again, only to be the one to retreat itself. Then the hallucination, which had seemed millennia long but had not even been a fraction of a second, ended. Most did not see what happened next. Even Lex's mind was not fast enough to process what happened. But due to the feedback from the inn, the image of what happened was imprinted in his mind. Ragnar did not flinch, nor did he look away. The black lightning struck him in the face, resulting in an explosion that completely decimated the abode around him. Though Lex had long stopped trying to depend on luck, somehow, his luck had held that day as all the formations he had put up had been destroyed, save the very last one. The cloud above the abode dissipated, as if it had never been there, and the ominous pressure that Lex had been feeling disappeared. In its wake, it had left behind a sight of utter destruction. There was not even a cloud of smoke covering the area, for everything in that space had been utterly destroyed, from dust to the very air molecules. Well, it had destroyed almost everything, for Ragnar still stood there, his posture completely unchanged. There was not a single rip on his tunic, and though his face was covered in blood, there wasn't even the slightest indication of pain on his face. His eyes were so calm that he may as well have taken a stroll in the park. After a couple of seconds, he finally reacted by cracking his neck. Then he walked out of the confines of what had been the abode, silently admiring the fact that the scope of destruction had been strictly restricted to his abode. The innkeeper was indeed impressive. He summoned his personal hologram and said, "Please deliver my message to the innkeeper. There was a devil who was challenging me before my tribulation. I would like to challenge him in the murder grounds." Chapter 517 Ambition. The festive mood at the inn had come to a pause. There was no fear that filled the air, but everyone had to take some time to settle their emotions after what they had just experienced. While everyone had experienced the same hallucination, and they could guess that it had been caused by the black lightning, they had no idea who that person they had hallucinated about was or if what they saw was even true. But regardless of those details, there was no one who could deny that the vision had their blood boiling. Everyone was suddenly in the mood to train or fight intense battles and somehow vent their raging emotions. There were very few who actually knew that the person in the hallucinations was actually Ragnar, mostly because they recognized him from pictures of his youth. Alexander was one of them, and while he displayed no outward emotion, inside he was filled with a burning passion. He did not want to just be strong, he wanted to be the strongest. Only by learning from such a man could he achieve that dream. Marlowe too felt his blood boiling, but he easily suppressed it. What was going through his head was completely unknown, even to his wife. All anyone could see him doing was sitting laxly on a sofa, twiddling his thumbs. But although he looked completely relaxed, the fire in his eyes spoke otherwise. There was a plan brewing in his mind. "Who was that?" asked the Empress as she flew to Jotun, her voice hiding bits of praise and admiration. "Our future son-in-law," Jotun replied with a casual smile. While everyone was experiencing different things, Lex's mind was like a tumultuous sea. First and foremost, he needed to learn about that tribulation. What the hell was that? If he had to spend 10 billion MP per strike of that black lightning, and a few more people underwent a similar tribulation, he would once again be completely broke. His current wealth was at 70 billion MP. He had earned quite a bit during the festival, and lately he had especially been earning a lot from the 1% transaction fee in the guild room. He thought it was swimming in cash, but it appeared far from the truth. But Lex quickly calmed down. The advantage was still with him. If he wanted to boost his earnings. With a wave of his hand, all the hidden entrances to the various minor realms in the inn became easier to find. He speculated it would take just a few more hours at most for people to find the first one. Moreover, the Grand Prix was coming soon. If past experiences had been anything to go by, Lex would be earning a lot soon enough. It was then that Mary informed him about Ragnar's request for a challenge in the murder ground, and a capitalistic gleam flashed through Lex's eyes. He just spent 10 billion on the man. It should be okay if he earned a little something back, right? In the spaceship above the inn, all the children were going absolutely wild. It was not fear that had gripped them, although for the younger ones that had initially been the case. But as they recovered from the hallucination and recalled where they were, something else happened. They began playing a game of war. Since the children had formed various gangs and factions, and had marked certain playgrounds as their home bases within the ship, they were now fighting a relentless war with pool noodles as their weapons. But not all kids were participating in the game. As it so happened, all the leaders of the various factions the kids had formed were sitting together in a conference room. Some were sipping apple juice, and some were eating chocolate pudding, while others still were fiddling with fidget spinners. But while some of them had become victims to their short attention spans, most of them were paying close attention to the person sitting at the head of the conference table. Like them, he was a kid, but his vision, his ambition, and most of all, his ingenious ideas had captivated them. He was not waiting for them to grow up before doing big things. No, he was building a network right now. The most expansive, secret, and diverse information network in the Origin realm was beginning to take shape, and at its head sat Roland. Previously, he had sold newspapers in the Crystal Realm. At the Midnight Inn, he had joined the Midnight Newsroom. But after spending some time here, and upon noticing the vast resources available at the inn, his hidden passion had been flamed awake. Since he was in the news business, he should take advantage of the biggest and most unsuspecting resource available, children. Everyone openly revealed their secrets in front of kids, because who would ever expect them to interfere, or even remember? It was not even their own parents they could spy on, but everyone they came across. So, we are in agreement? Roland asked, tapping his fingers on the table in an easy rhythm. A series of eyes, yes and yes filled the room as all the kids became super excited. In that case, I would like to announce officially the beginning of Operation Secret Base and Operation Secret Agents. Remember, don't tell your faction members everything. Get the information from them and pass it along. They must think they're the only ones doing this, and that it's a secret. Or else they won't feel like spies. And you remember that you're not the only one who will have access to all the information, said Layla. Jimmy was standing dutifully behind her and giving a challenging look to Roland. Sure, Roland was much older than the two of them, but they led one of the strongest factions of children, the Peacock Warriors. They feared no one and nothing. Of course, replied Roland. Prove yourselves, and I'll help you become secret members of the newsroom. That way you'll all be able to access the information. Chapter 518, Casual Conversation. Lex was momentarily driven by thoughts of raking in a ton of MP selling tickets to watch the fight between Ragnar and the devil. He could use the attention Ragnar had gained with the in-wide hallucination to attract attention, but it was not meant to be. The devil, as he learned, was locked within his abode, cultivating, with no knowledge of what was happening outside. Many guests, Lex had noticed, despite being at high realms ended up simply cultivating after experiencing the star upgrade, such as the Griffin, and did not encounter any tribulations. Maybe they were simply making progress without making any strides across any large thresholds. Regardless, Lex sent a response letting Ragnar know that at the moment the devil was unable to respond, but he would let him know of the answer. With that small interlude past, Lex turned his attention back to the portal to investigate the shining irisberry fruit for the turtle. Ragnar was slightly disappointed when he heard the response, but it was probably for the best. Despite what it had seemed like, his emotions had gotten the best of him and that devil really had managed to rile him up. Although it seemed like he had only suffered a mild injury from that bolt of lightning, that was not really the case. After stabilizing his increased cultivation, he would have to return to his command carrier, for the recovery pods would not be able to help him in his current condition. He would require some exceptionally rare and valuable medicine that had been stored back on his ship. But his plan to return was suddenly stalled when he saw two humans descending towards him from the sky. As awkward as it might be, he recognized the lady first. It was Her Majesty Eleanor, the current Empress of the Jotun Empire. The reason Ragnar recognized her first was because the image of the Emperor was not actually that widely spread. It was for that very reason that even the Emperor had been surprised when he was recognized by a common soldier. But the moment Ragnar recognized her, his eyes flashed to the man beside her and realization dawned on him. It wasn't as if he had never seen the Emperor, but that the picture he had seen portrayed the man in full royal armor with a halo of incredible power around him. Right now, the Emperor looked nothing like his picture and instead looked like a random youth. Ragnar was not one to suffer from the common mistake of judging someone by their appearance, as in the cultivation world appearances were the most deceiving. Instead, he usually gauged people by the intensity of their spiritual aura. Yet the Emperor had restrained his aura completely when he came to the inn, so he could even be mistaken for a mortal if one didn't know better. "Your Highness!" Ragnar exclaimed as he gave a military salute, finally adding a single crease to his, as of yet, completely pristine tunic. "At ease, General," Jotun said. "That was an impressive display. Tell me, how long have you been a heaven immortal?" "A little under 100 years, Majesty." "Less than 100 years, and you've already passed through the first mark. Very impressive, young man. I dare say there are few in the history of the entire empire who can compete with you. It is still below your achievements, Majesty. PFT, don't compare yourself with me. That's unfair to your hard work. News of your achievements have made it to my ear, Ragnar. Considering I'm barely ever in the Empire, that is already an impressive feat, but when the Innkeeper himself told me I should give you an audience, I was genuinely taken aback. I wonder what you have to share with me." Surprise flashed through Ragnar's eyes, but he quickly calmed down. Although they did not meet often, it seemed like he really had developed a good relationship with the Innkeeper. After all, there was no need for him to mention Ragnar to the Emperor. Even Ragnar himself had never spoken of such a request, so for the Innkeeper to do it on his own initiative was a show of good faith. Moreover, it was one that he sorely needed. Although he had set up a task at the inn to find someone capable of following the Jorlum's trail, there was no guarantee that things would not go horribly wrong before that opportunity could even be availed. Moreover, there was the matter of the aura he collected from the devil Loretta. "I have a room, Majesty. Perhaps we should talk there." "Lead the way." Ragnar did not hesitate to lead the way, not to any of the rooms he had recently rented, but the one he rented so long ago, inside the Midnight Manor. The Emperor and Empress followed him without putting up any pretenses, but when they entered the room and saw a small cylinder sitting in the center, their attention was completely diverted to it. "Your Highness, this seal contains the traces of aura I collected from the devil known as Loretta. Although I suspect the aura has been altered heavily, it should still be useful." "Why have you stored it here instead of submitting it to the Empire?" asked the Empress, though she made no attempts to inspect the seal. Ragnar paused, as if he was ashamed to voice his words, which ultimately attracted the Emperor's attention even more than the seal. "Speak up, what is it?" "Highness, I apologize if my words sound like blasphemy, but I suspect there are traitors in the Empire." There are many things that have happened recently that do not make sense, and I have suspicions that someone is sending me to my death. The Empress was alarmed by the sudden revelation, but Jotun did not seem too surprised. You do not need to worry about the veracity of your words. Even the Innkeeper has hinted at the fact that the long absence of my brothers and I from the Empire has caused the relations between our families to sour. Jotun, what are you saying? Eleanor asked, genuinely shocked by what she was hearing. Although it may seem as if he had said something casual, he had said in very simple words that a rebellion was brewing, likely spurred by their own descendants. But Jotun did not answer. Instead, he looked directly at Ragnar and asked, General, tell me honestly, where do your loyalties lie? Ragnar looked down at the ground in shame. Standing before him was the strongest human alive. A flick of his finger would be enough to decimate Ragnar, so it was all but impossible to lie to him. He had to be honest. Forgive me, Majesty, but my loyalty lies not with the Empire, but with the human race. Silence fell in the room as Eleanor and Ragnar both waited for Jotun to reply. For a general of the Empire to speak such words. Tell me, Ragnar, are you married? Jotun asked. Chapter 519 Being Responsible. Ragnar was startled by the question, as that was not what he was expecting. Your Majesty. Marriage. All right, forget about it. Let's focus on other things. I admire your strength of character, child, but that's all you really have at the moment. Don't let your successful tribulation get to your head. You're too weak to be talking about the good or bad of the human race. These are things you're not yet qualified to even think about, so let's focus on something else. Tell me, why do you think you're being sent to your death? A hint of shame flashed through Ragnar's mind. It had been a very long time since he felt like a child being admonished by an adult, but before the Emperor, that is what he truly was. Like the Emperor said, there were too many things he was unqualified to know. But what he did know was that, despite the minuscule size of the Empire compared to the Origin realm, it was not just the humans of the Empire who were being supported by the Emperor. Currently, the devils used the humans to farm their demons openly, but not many other races acted so blatantly despite feeling superior to humans. But this had not always been the case. As an immortal, Ragnar had access to a higher-level authority on the Henali portal, and so he had read the history of the human race, as scarcely recorded as it was. The human race was one of the most popular races to have as slaves realm-wide simply because they started out in the mortal realm, and unless they actively cultivated, they were unable to resist their superiors. As such, by restricting their ability to cultivate, most races took advantage of them. They had the intellect and mobility to be perfect slaves. Back then, there were truly very few human forces worthy of note in the entire realm. Other than the Sephor family, there were only the paladins, the beast masters, and the merfolk. By the time the Emperor rose to power, and single-handedly raised the prestige of the human race, the merfolk had already been driven to the point of extinction due to the unique threat their bloodlines posed. Although Ragnar was not exactly clear on what the Emperor had done that changed so much, he knew that he himself was far from reaching such a level. He focused his thoughts and began listing everything that had raised his suspicions. What greatly surprised him was that, even the Emperor himself was shocked to learn of the Jorlum. It seemed the gap in communication in the Empire was bigger than it had seemed. To some degree, it was expected. After all, the Empire spanned galaxies. Not all places had access to the Henali portal equally. But something like this. What Ragnar didn't know was that Jotun was genuinely much more alarmed than he let on. A growing Jorlum was not a rebellion against the Empire, it was a rebellion against the Henali. After doing his research at the portal, Lex was relieved that the fruit he needed was not exceptionally rare. At least compared to the ore Lex needed to strengthen his own body, it was not a big deal. Not wanting to waste any time, he teleported over to the Emporium and placed his order, while also collecting his latest batch of techniques for the library. They did not have the fruit in stock, but they could get it soon enough, considering Lex's high customer level. If Lex hadn't been suspicious that the Emporium was actually the result of a system, he would have directly given them a key and invited them to open a store at the inn. It would be so convenient for the inn. When Lex returned to the inn, he already had a list of tasks planned out for himself, but two notifications made him pause. The first one was expected: someone had finally discovered the first minor realm. Once the discovery had been made, the entrance to the minor realm became a lot more evident and took the shape of a single wooden door. About 1,000 guests had already entered the realm in the short few minutes Lex was gone to the Emporium, and more were continuously entering. As for what was on the other end, there was no news yet. The second news was unexpected. He had been sent a warning from Larry via the hologram. Apparently, there was someone identical to him at the inn, called William. The warning was not because they looked identical, or that William had expressed curiosity towards Lex once he found out about him. That was only a natural reaction someone would have once they learned someone looked similar or identical to them. Instead, William and his brothers had displayed an interest in Earth that unsettled Larry. Other than asking about Lex, they also asked a lot of questions about Marlowe. They had explained the source of their curiosity was the fact that Marlowe's name was high in the guest registry, and while that was a reasonable explanation for their curiosity, Larry felt extremely wary. He then also shared the news that Marlowe was about to make a move against the prisoners on Earth by himself and that Larry was intending on joining him. He invited Lex to join if he was interested. Lex sighed. The issue with William was a real headache, and in the back of his mind he had been considering returning to Earth to confront his family. While he had been angry originally, he suppressed his anger and decided not to jump to conclusions until he heard their explanation. He also didn't want too much trouble caused on Earth, as he still had lingering attachment to the planet he grew up on. Yet there was also a part of him that wanted to forget all of that, and just stay at the inn. It would be so easy to give up on those problems. But Lex had been trying to be more responsible lately, so he knew he couldn't just give up on it. Lex sent him a letter telling Larry that he'd avoid William, and that he'd join him on Earth. As for the repercussions, well, he couldn't control the whole universe. He would do what he could, but he held no expectations of becoming some random hero that protects the planet from every disaster. Occasionally missing content, please report errors in time. Chapter 520 Retreat. Things at the Midnight Inn were going great. The festival was a great success, and in the span of a few hours 5 different minor realms had been discovered. Nearly 100,000 guests had already entered the realms, except for one which apparently had an age restriction. Only those below 20 years of age could enter that realm, for whatever reason. While that dissuaded ordinary guests from trying to enter, as humans, beasts and other races alike were usually still very weak at that age, several sects were greatly interested. The evil Diplo sect were the first to gather at the portal and sent countless members of their sects, alongside their slaves below the age limit. But while they were the first to act, they were not the only ones who had such an idea. Soon dozens of other sects who had unexpectedly arrived at the inn during the festival also began sending their younger generation inside, including even the paladins. That one minor realm became a confrontational ground for the various sects, especially since they were banned from fighting at the inn. It wasn't as if they hadn't tried, but the inn was a lot stricter now with such a situation. The guards would immediately capture whoever started a confrontation and exile them from the inn, irrespective of their excuse. Being banned from the inn was too major a loss for these sects who had just discovered this excellent holy land. But the inn had given specific disclaimers that its protection did not extend to the minor realms, so everyone should only proceed at their own discretion. While that represented danger, it also represented an opportunity to compete for unclaimed resources. The sects would never give up such an opportunity. Lex sat in his office, monitoring the situation. The minor realms had increased his MP earnings, because many would come back in need of recovery pods, or would put up the treasures they obtained for sale at the guild room. This was exactly the kind of progress he liked to see. He could tell that the minor realms would bring in even more guests soon enough, and that even the village would become too crowded. He would need to build yet another settlement, so he once again began working with the planning division. He had Main Street, which had some of the inn's unique attractions, but also handled less of the crowds. The village was where most of the guests spent their time because that's where most of the attractions and entertainment were located. The third settlement would have to be focused around the minor realms. Watching the inn grow was exciting, but he was in a rush because the Grand Prix would start the next day and he was participating in that. He wanted the new settlement to already be in place before that began, as the race would be the perfect opportunity to bring attention to it by having the track pass through it. But while Lex was busy with expanding the inn, there was something else going on that had escaped his attention. With the host attire and his office chair making him in sync with the inn, it wasn't as if he hadn't been exposed to it, but with the number of things going on at the inn, this really was not worth giving any extra attention to. While the numerous guests and even staff underwent a growth period due to the latest star rating increase, many of the normal animals at the inn had only barely benefited from it. Such was the case with the many magic carpet that Lex had brought to the inn. Their vitality had increased and their colors grew more lustrous. One of them, however, was experiencing something very unusual. It had fallen into a slumber, allowing its body to fall to the bottom of the lake where the fish lived. As if the unusually long slumber was not odd enough, in recent days its body had started to emit a soft glow. A dim but clear light was emitted from between the magic carpet scales, but as the days went by, the light began to get brighter and brighter. Eventually, the light became so bright that it started to attract attention, not only of its fellow magic carpet, but of the various guests who were swimming in the lake. Thinking they had discovered another entrance to a minor realm, many swarmed towards the light, but, before they could actually approach the magic carpet, its shape began to change. A storm of spirit energy appeared over the fish, similar to the one that had encompassed Lex during his breakthrough, and its body began growing rapidly. From just a few feet in size, it rapidly grew to 12 feet, then to 20 before it began slowing down until it reached around 25 feet, 7.6 meters, in length. A heavy, intimidating aura enveloped its still shining body, resulting in all the guests retreating in alarm. The light continued to envelop the shape for a few more minutes as its body changed further, but when the light faded, it revealed a new monstrosity. No longer did it have the soft and cute round eyes of the magic carpet, and no longer did it have warm, red scales that made one want to cuddle with it. No, magic carpet had mutated into a ferocious creature, with each and every fiber of its being radiating a savage aura. Its strength was not from a growth in spiritual cultivation, but rather its body packed strength that could shake the very seas. The various magic carpets in the lake slowly swam to the new being to observe it, and then began swimming around it as if carrying out some ritual. But the creature was not paying attention to any of that. As a being that belonged to the inn, the moment it grew and gained sentience, it automatically became an employee. So its attention was completely diverted to a screen that had appeared in front of it, with words written on it that the beast could somehow read. The screen read, "For the first annual inn employee retreat, please list down any dietary restrictions. Also, please confirm whether you would like dancing lessons before the retreat."